you might be able to imagine, even if you don't have kids, that your special little piece of your heart is how we were talking about them the other night. And they're blowing up, and they're not just kind of blowing up generally, they're blowing up in your direction, and it's your fault probably. And it's really hard and kind of just puts you in the hot seat, to say the least. We're talking about the internal script that might go on, and to be careful of when a child's having a tantrum, how to maybe change that. And I want you guys to reflect today what your internal script is. Maybe not so much when a toddler has a tantrum, but when things blow up in your life. What's the internal script? What do you say about yourself? What do you say about it, the thing that's blowing up? What's the external script? What do you do when things go wrong? I'll give you a minor one. On Wednesday, I just wanted to go home in the afternoon. I was over a river with some work stuff, and I wanted to go home. I had to stop on the way to get some things for the decorating night that we had here on Wednesday night. And so I went into the shop, I came out from the shop, and I thought, good, it's time to go home to my wife and my kids. I've got a few hours before I get back to the next thing, decorating. And the car went instead of boom. It had a flat battery, and I was just so frustrated. I just wanted to go home. It was a bit hot, and it was time to go home. But I couldn't, I had those weird thoughts of maybe I could push it, like, how could I change this situation? And there was nothing to do except wait. What's the internal script about this always happens to me or something like that, right? And don't you have one too? I was talking to one of my friends at the surf club who has integrity. I know him as a person of integrity and kindness. But what's happened is he's been giving his rent money to the guy he lives with, who then passes it on to the landlord, right? And every so often he's asked to pay early because there's just pressures or whatever, and so he pays early. But he's now found out that even though he's been paying, the guy he gives the hand the money to has not been passing it on. So they're being evicted, and he might not get some of that early money, probably won't get his loan back. It's really stressful and challenging, especially because he knows himself as someone who has integrity. Why is this happening? What will people think of me? Internal script. What about external script? What do you do? How do you respond in those? Like, do you get to action, or do you switch off and slump? Internal script, external. I know another family from the morning church, Little Souls, that lives here. They've got aging parents overseas who don't want help but need help. They've got kids who've been in hospital several times in the last few months, just late at night, respiratory infection, and have to race to hospital in the middle of the night, and then there's a there. Work is new and hard, and the boss for one of them just thinks that she does the wrong thing all the time. And for the most part, she doesn't. She thinks that her boss just has some image problems or kind of self-esteem problems, and it all just gets loaded on top of my friend. And it's not any one big challenge that this family is going through, but it's several all at once. And I hear the internal script, as they say, and I hear the external script and the external actions, and it's hard. It's just challenging. And all of us, when we go through these kinds of things, do something with them. We put them into a script. And that's just what humans do. We make meaning, we put them inside of a framework, and we say this is what it means, or it doesn't mean this. And we try and make meaning out of the things that are challenging, or we say they don't mean anything at all, which is the kind of meaning. And I wonder what your go-to might be. I think of some of the common go-tos that we have. I don't deserve this. That's negative like that. I've been working hard today, and I just want to see my family that I need to see. I don't deserve this. Or I do deserve this because of yesterday when I treated that person what I did. Or such is life. These things just happen. It's kind of stoic, isn't it? Supposedly Ned Kelly said that just before he was executed. Such is life. These things just happen, which is not completely true because he's been shooting people in the wrong places. But you see what he's getting at. It's kind of it's kind of Jordan Peterson. You just got to face these things because life is suffering, and we shouldn't probably expect these. Yeah, let me see what else I wrote down. Or there's kind of just the hopeful, everything happens for a reason. I don't know what those reasons are, but we'll just float through and it'll work out at the end. And that has there's some meaning there, and there's a worldview in all of these. There's a worldview and a spirituality behind all those that says, I know what this is about, or I don't know what this is about, because of my worldview, it's going to be okay. I'm so glad you're here tonight. I'm looking here and I can see there's no new people. And I can see half of our people are away. But I've been excited all week about giving this message for those who gather. Because Jesus has got something of substance for you. He's got a framework that is true and that you can hold on to. And you don't need to kind of hope that everything's for a reason. You don't need to just be stoic, such as life. He's going to give you a framework that is true and that he holds firmly for you. And this is what it is. I am the vine. My Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. I hope you're getting familiar with this so far. We've done it, I think, 4 or 5 weeks in a row now. We'll do it again next week as our final one. Jesus is giving you a framework for your life, but particularly here in verse 2, a framework for challenges and pain, an internal script, and I think some external action as well, or reaction as well. Here it is. Every branch that bears fruit, my Father will cut some things off. He'll clean it, he'll prune, so that it will be even more fruitful. Here is Jesus' framework for you who follow him, that God takes away from his people sometimes, because he loves them. We've been looking at the vine metaphor, and remember a few weeks ago when Matt preached, he spoke about that just one line, my Father is the gardener. And what we go deeper with tonight and see tonight is that this gardener who has his eyes on you as the thing that he wants to grow, who has plans for you, he's not just having a go. He hasn't just kind of thrown some seeds out or kind of, stuck a stick in the ground and see if it goes. He's got firm plans for you, careful plans, so much so that he's going to take action that will be a bit painful. He's going to snip things off to draw more out of you. This is a gardener with intention and closeness. That's what we hear when we hear of fruit. What this is teaching is that God will take things away, and I'm going to say, and I'll come back to this, inflict pain, maybe wield pain, or use pain. There's a few different verbs I've put out there with different emphasis. God's going to inflict pain. He's going to wield pain, and sometimes he's going to use pain to bring out greater things in you. It's all working off of the vine metaphor. We're right in the vine metaphor. But what exactly, how does the metaphor speak? Well, if a vine just keeps on growing lots and lots of leaves, basically the sugars that the leaves produce will be too spread out. And when you get fruit, you'll get little fruit here and there, and it'll be scattered. Like, I'm sorry to say this, you'll feel funny after this. Like, not enough butter on toast. Like butter, just kind of, there's a bit over here, a bit over there, and it's not really enough that any of it's nice. And that's what happens with the fruit. The sugars get spread out too far, and so what we do, we take off this leaf here, this little shoot there, and we concentrate what's going on in there, so that when the fruit comes, there'll be a big bunch here, and it'll be full of sweetness. That's what's going on in the picture. And Jesus is bringing that picture into the Christian life, saying there's going to be things that hurt. But this God, this gardener, is powerful, and he can actually use it like a gardener to bring more than he would have had otherwise. I think there's going to be at least 2 big ways that pruning happens in our lives. You'll put it up there. Either clearing for a better thing, or clearing for the best thing. Let's talk about what that might look like. Clearing for a better thing, I think, is where we've got our heart set on something that we want. Maybe it's a career path, maybe it's a particular opportunity at work, maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's children, maybe it's a certain lifestyle. And we pray for it because we're his people and we sit in him, we abide in him, we know that all things come from him, so we sit and we pray. And he says no. He obviously says no because it's just not there. And then I'd say one of these two things happens. He clears or doesn't answer, doesn't give the thing, so that a better thing has space to come, also that the best thing. So let's talk about those two things. A better thing. It's where he just holds something off so that you're ready for a better thing. A great example of this is the minister, it's finished now, of Poetry in Brompton, Nicky Gumbel, who runs the Alpha course. A beautiful man who I love watching him follow Jesus as being Steve. And he said that he was a barrister, fully trained, had a good job, but he felt called to full-time vocational gospel ministry. So it was time to retrain. And he applied for what he thought, what he knew was the best institution, the best Bible college to go to. I won't mention it, I can't remember. And so he applied, and they said to him, look, you're the very first on the waiting list. We're full for next year, but you're very first. And you know what? There's always 5 or 6 or even 7 people that cancel. So just count it as good as in. So he counted himself as good as in Bible college. And he started telling his friends at work, I'm done here next year. I'm going into gospel ministry and I've got to retrain. You won't see me here anymore. He gets a call from the registrar in, I guess, January or July, probably. And they say, strangest thing has happened. No one has cancelled this for this semester. We can't accept you. I'm really sorry. God, he says. And he's already, you know, as much as given resignation at work, or at least just, you know, talk that way. And it's too late to apply for anywhere else. And he feels like he's being proved. God has taken away what he thought was in front of him. And now at work, people won't give him any good work, any good jobs, because they all know that he's out of here as soon as he gets the next offer. And he said he had this terrible year. Cut back. Felt like God wasn't looking after him. But then he studied somewhere else, completely different uni, not the best one. And he got a job at Holy Trinity Brompton, where he is. And he's probably one of the most influential Christian ministers in the Western world in our day. He reaches so many people. And he said, I wouldn't have done that. I would have gone a different pathway and done something else if God had let me go to the best institution. And it could be that for you sitting here tonight, God's saying no. And you're thinking, why are you saying no? This would be the best. You know, this is the most godly. It might not even be very worldly. It might not just be, I really want to get rich. It might be something really, you know, that you know is close to God's heart, like going to the best Bible college. And he's saying no, and he's not letting you, because he's got something better for you in the future. This is one of the ways I think we are pruned. There's another way that I think, and maybe perhaps even more common, which is where he clears things or prunes things so that you will get the best. And that's where he doesn't just say no to the best Bible college or this or that thing. He just says no, and there's no better Bible college that he's got ready for you. And what you need to do is, or what happens is, you're pushed into him. Your pathway isn't not this Bible college, but that one. Your pathway is not this Bible college, but God himself. You miss out on the thing that you want. And if you are one of his, it makes you draw in close to him. Say, well, I guess all I have is you. And then you have him deeper and more intimately, and you will be more fruitful. I think that's maybe one of the main ways that perhaps because there's so much suffering in our world. And that brings me to what I want to do next with you, which is just put in a few caveats. Because if you're a thinking person, you'll be wondering if this God is just a bit statistic and just kind of lets really painful things happen to people willy-nilly. Because there is a lot of pain in our lives and in the world. And some people don't just miss out on a Bible college or a promotion or a spouse. But there are people who just, throughout history, right, all around the world, their life is just suffering. And I want to say that this passage here, which is what I'm going to major on, teaches that God uses those things for good, and that he wields them, is what I'm going to say. He wields those things, suffering. But there's other parts of the Bible that make very clear to us that God is against suffering. And he calls death his enemy. And Jesus weeps at the funeral, doesn't he? And so this is the caveat. God can pick up and use painful things and suffering, and I think sometimes even hands them to us, and they are straight from his hand. But the main teaching of the Bible is that suffering does not belong to him, and that he's working very hard to weed it out, and that it's not a good thing. It's a bit of a complex point that I think maybe is best held by a story in Genesis, the story of Joseph. God has promised his people in Abraham that he's going to bless them and he's going to bless all nations. And you see God blessing and building this nation up and growing them bigger and bigger and more strong and healthy. And then we come to Joseph, and we won't get in very much to the detail. But what we find is that Joseph, who belongs to the family that's been told by God that they will be blessed and they'll bless the other nation, just gets pounded through his life for many, many years. Let's just list some of them. He's thrown into a pit by his brothers. Some slave traders come and pick him out of the pit and into the slave traders. The slave traders take him off. He ends up, I can't quite remember what's directly next, but ends up in prison soon after. He's misquoted, like he's accused of trying to seduce Potiphar's wife. He didn't do it. He's in prison. And it just thing after thing is against him. And finally, at the end of the story, he meets his brothers who put him in the pit originally. And he says that line, which you need to hold on to. What you intended, what you did, he's saying to his brothers, what you intended for evil, God has used for your good. Did God intend evil on Joseph? Was God the source of evil? Was not. But he is so powerful that he can even use sharp and painful things to do good. Because Joseph ends up the Prince of Egypt. But not just the Prince of Egypt, Joseph ends up providing for all of Egypt and the nations around them food. And the promise of God back in Genesis chapter 12, I'll bless you and I'll bless all the nations around you through you, is worked out through Joseph's suffering. And the promise is worked out through the evil intentions of the people around him. And I reckon all the way through, Joseph was thinking, that story about my grandfather, Abraham, I don't know that it can be true. Look, I'm in prison. And yet all the while, God was using those things to get Joseph not further away. He wasn't even just in a holding pattern. He was taking him closer to the heart of Egypt and the government so that he could be a blessing. And there was no way that Joseph could see that except by faith. Not with his eyes, but with holding on to the promise of God. Now, Hebrews chapter 12 says, 12 says that sometimes God disciplines his sons and daughters. So I've got to take that to mean, if I'm an honest Christian, that I think that sometimes God does give us a flat battery, or things come from his hand that are painful. But I also hold on to, I think, the story arc of the Bible that says God is good and he does not do evil. And he's against suffering and he's working, and death is the last enemy. There's a bit of nuance in this point that I'm trying to make, which is God is not the source of evil, but he can prune with it. And he can use things that other people meant with bad intention, he can use it. The other thing that this doesn't mean is that we enjoy pain and we kind of have to smile through it. I think that's an ugly kind of Christianity that now there's a way to rejoice in suffering, but it's not pat and it's not cute. And I don't think that you need to pretend through suffering that you're enjoying it. But what we are called to do is to abide in him, to remain in him and have him remain in us in those things, and we hold on to him. But I don't think it means that we ought to try and enjoy or pretend to enjoy the challenge. This also, the fact that God prunes and uses challenges also doesn't mean that we don't plan and make wise decisions. We do. We go into life and we look for opportunities to be blessed, and we look for opportunities to order our lives in ways that work and bring abundance. What we're talking about is when you sit under God's rule and you live under his ethical boundaries and you do all that you can. There's so much freedom under God for the Christian person to do lots and to plan and work and bring good. We're talking about the times when you've done all you can under him, and still there's a no, or still there's a taking away and bringing back. But we are still to act wisely and plan, protect ourselves. I want to talk about why we trust this pruner. We trust this pruner even when he takes things that are dear from us. Because he's in control, he's sovereign. I've been trying to be nuanced and say that he doesn't cause suffering and evil is not from him. And yet he's sovereign, which means he's holding it all together and letting it happen at the very least. So how can we know that we could trust him? How could we know that this is a framework that's worthy, that's good for us? It's because Jesus was not just pruned, but cut off at the cross. And it was for your sake. It was not for him to be more fruitful, it was because he loves you. And the one who prunes you is also the one who would give up his son Jesus for you. And we've got to hold on to this in those moments of pain and think, man, I can't believe you're taking this away from me as well. I can't believe you're letting this happen as well. Unless we hold on to the fact that he is good, and we've seen that at the cross, that he's for us, even unto his own death, we won't be able to trust that he's really for us. It'll just feel like he's against us. Bethany, who's part of our congregation and such a blessing to us, she's gone home to Dublin. I don't believe she's watching on tonight, but she said she will be in the next couple of weeks. She told me she heard we're talking about pruning, and she told me a lovely thing. She said, when I was a little girl, my dad would grow roses. And she said, every year, I'd see him cutting them back, and I would run out to him and say, it's too much, Dad. Because she said these huge rose bushes, tall rose bushes, would look so small and gnarly. And she said, why do you make them so small? You've taken away too much. And he would say, it'll be worth it. It'll be worth it. And then spring would come and summer, and then flowers, abundant flowers. And he would call her out and he'd say, do you remember the pruning? And he'd say, this is why we have to prune. This is why we have to prune. And she said there's been times in her life where God has taken the word she used was so much from her. There will be times when God could do so much more with you and for you, but he'll cut you back. He'll take a lot away, and you'll look smaller than you, because he's either clearing room so there's something better, there's an opportunity for something better to come up, and you're ready, or for the best thing, to draw you in close to him, to teach you that nothing else can provide for you and feed you and nourish you like he. And the trick is, will we abide in him? Will we, I want you to just, what does that word mean? Sit in him. Will we let the biggest truth in that moment, and there's other truth, right? But will the biggest truth for us in that moment be, Jesus is my Lord and he's my Savior. This thing will not be good enough to be a Lord, and this thing will not be good enough to save me, empower me and feed me. And pruning will lead to abiding that brings richness and abundant fruit. He's got big plans for us, even so big, so grand that it'll take some cutting and taking away at night. Time to draw him. We're going to sing. And we're going to sing that song, Resurrender, which is pretty fitting. We're going to come back and have another go